Hey guys, welcome back for your Chapter 5 and 6 lecture video for Principles of Public Speaking over the summer. This is going to cover both Chapters 5 and 6 because Chapter 5 is really short, so we're just going to combine those two together. Chapter 5 deals with finding information for your speeches. This will be really important for your informative speeches as you have to have a source for those. And Chapter 6 actually deals with organizing and outlining your presentation. So again, you've done an outline for your pet peeves presentations already, but again, we're going to go over some steps that you can use to include some more interesting and relevant information in your outlines, and also how to format them correctly for this course and for other courses as well. We're going to go back to Chapter 5 first. Chapter 5 is super short and pretty straight to the point. But it goes over how to find information for your speeches and for your presentations, okay? Now, it can be really difficult sometimes when you've thought of a topic, whatever that may be that you want to speak on, to find relevant information to speak on, whether that be telling a story about yourself, whether that be talking about a topic that you found that you want to tell us more about, such as an informative, or maybe if you have to do a demonstration of something, how to find information to supplement that demonstration, all right? One of the easiest ways that you can find information is to use personal experience. And again, we've talked about this before. You have a wealth of knowledge within you that we don't necessarily have. So using that sort of personal inventory that we've talked about earlier in the course can really help find information about your topic or about yourself if that's what you choose for your topic. You can learn a lot from your own experiences. Telling a personal story, again, can be one of the most important things you can do in a speech to grab your audience's attention or to maintain their attention or to get them sort of feeling some certain way that you want to have them feel about your presentation, all right? So those personal stories can be really useful, and that can be relevant information, okay? So if you are talking about, again, one of those cliche topics about smoking and how smoking is bad for you, if you have a relative or someone you know and love who has been affected by smoking negatively, so if they were to have heart problems or lung problems or any other type of problem that can come from smoking, telling that story can be really beneficial for that speech. That's a good wealth of knowledge that you have that other people may not have. Or conversely, if they do have a similar situation, that helps them relate to you on a personal level. Again, it's all about using relevant and useful information to them so that they, again, maintain their attention throughout your speech. But again, so that personal inventory can be really helpful. All right. Another interesting method of finding information that's not just doing a Google search is interviewing somebody else. You know, we've said that we all have a story to tell. Well, everyone else has a story to tell too. So using an interview can help you out as well. So going back to that same example, if you were to interview someone who was a long-time smoker and about their regrets or about some of their health issues that they may have had as a result of their smoking, that interview can be really valuable information that you can include in that presentation, all right? But with interviews, you need to understand the purpose of your speech, all right? So what is the purpose of the interview? You want your questions for that interview to relate directly back to your topic and directly to the point of your speech. If you are trying to inform someone about the negative side effects of smoking, all right, you would want to make sure that the person you are interviewing is able to discuss that with you. So you may want to talk to a doctor or, again, maybe somebody you know who is involved or has smoked, right, and has some side effects from that, some negative health problems as a result of that, because, again, that would help show the negative side effects of smoking, okay? If you were there to persuade people to not smoke, same kind of thing. You would want kind of the same information. You'd want those personal stories, a personal interview of someone who was negatively affected by it. Because again, their story will help add emphasis to your overall topic and to your overall speech purpose. All right. You want to make sure that you know the person beforehand. You want to make sure that they're willing to talk to you. You want to know some of their background. To say, hey, you know, I was a regular teenager in high school doing all these things. I played football, I did this and that, and then I started smoking and everything changed. I couldn't breathe as well. I was suffering physically. I wasn't able to perform as well on the football field, you know, that kind of thing. You want to make sure you know some background on them before you go in because, again, you want to make sure that what they're saying and their story reflects your overall topic. All right. You want to plan your questions in advance. That's just good interviewing 101. You don't want to go in there blindly. You want to have at least a set of about 5 to 10 questions to ask someone. And you may not get all those questions answered. And you may develop questions as you go, because a lot of times interviews are very sort of organic, right? They just kind of happen. You start talking about things, and you may address some things you didn't even think about writing down to ask. So again, come in with a set list, but understand that you may not get all of those answered, but that you may get some other answers as you go that could also be beneficial. Okay, but you always want to have some planned questions before you go in. You don't want to go in blindly. That makes you seem unprepared, and we don't want to do that. You're able to record interviews most of the time. You want to ask permission from your interviewee before you record them, because sometimes people are iffy about that, especially if it's in a professional setting. Some people are very iffy about recording themselves at work or something like that, because again, there's some ethical issues there. Always want to be ethical. Remember, ethos, right? Easiest thing to do if you can't record is to just jot down notes as you go, taking a small notebook with you, jot down answers to your interview questions as you go, and make sure you clarify those answers before you publish them in your speech. All right. But generally, again, recording is okay. From a journalism background, you can usually record as long as you ask permission. So again, just make sure it's okay with your interviewee before you go in. Recording them is the easiest way to make sure you get the factual answer, or as close to the actual answer as possible. There's always room for error when taking notes, but again, if you take accurate notes and you clarify with them after you've written down your answer, you should be okay. But again, just ask them what method they prefer and just go from there. But again, all those tips can be used in interviewing, and those interviews, again, provide a wealth of knowledge that you may not have but can come from another individual. All right, and those individual stories really help sell your point. They help bring your point home, all right, to your audience. Other information sources, we have what we call library resources. And these are essentially, things that you can find in a library. Magazines, journals, newspapers, books, videos, any sort of historical document or anything like that, any public records, you can usually find those in a library. I know these days we all tend to, our first resource is Google to find information, and that's okay. It's a perfectly adequate tool as sort of a first go around to find information. But a lot of times people forget that there is information to be found in books and in periodicals like magazines, and in sort of videos they may have available at the library. And it's not necessarily just a school library. It can be your public library. It can be a library in your city, a municipal kind of library for public documents, some archives, that kind of thing. So all of those we consider library resources, but they're not necessarily just found in a library. But again, they're anything that you can think of sort of that is published. So magazines, journals, newspapers, books, videos, and documents, okay? So again, the internet's great. We're going to talk about that here in a second, but there's also other alternatives to finding information that aren't just on the internet. It's kind of an old school method, but sometimes newer isn't necessarily better. So make sure you don't count those out as resources. And then we come to the internet. Now that's sort of our go-to to find information these days, and it should be. It was the information superhighway, so it's full of information. Literally infinite information can be found on the internet about an infinite number of topics, and that's why it's so good. The problem with it is you want to be ethical, okay, and you want your information to be logical and to make sense. So your ethos logos here really come into play. You want to be careful here. You want to make sure that your sites are credible. And now we all know some non-credible sites on the internet, right? What's the first one we think of? Wikipedia, right? We never, ever, ever want to use Wikipedia as a main source or a cited source in a presentation, okay? Wikipedia is useful, and we'll talk about that in a second, but you never want it to be sort of your main cited resource, okay? you want to make sure that your sites are credible. You want to make sure the source is credible. So to do that, you want to make sure they have a .gov or .edu website. That means if it's .gov, it's a government website, and so generally those are fairly credible because it's the government posting information for the world to use. And .edus generally come from universities or other educational entities. So, for instance, University of West Alabama is uwa.edu, and any sort of subsidiaries of that website still have that .edu website. Okay, so those are generally pretty credible. You can do a regular Google search. That can lead you to some interesting articles, or it can give you just an overview of the topic. But a more useful source for academic resources is what we call Google Scholar. And you can just, it's scholar.google.com. And that gives you access to academic articles and academic journals and published works that are very credible. They come from universities, they come from research publications, so all of those are generally very credible. You can refine your search as large or as small as you want, and there may not be as much in that about your specific topic, but if there are, it will link you to newspaper articles, it will link you to, again, academic journals and websites and government websites, so it's necessarily a more credible Google search, if you will. But again, the regular Google search can sort of give you the broad overview and help you find some links, but Google Scholar will help you out in terms of finding credible sources. So again, either one of those is okay if you're going to use Google. Just make sure, again, that your site is credible. All right. Wikipedia, again, we don't want to cite as our main resource. However, Wikipedia can be useful. At the bottom of every Wikipedia article and every Wikipedia page, there's a reference section. Okay, so this is where the people who have written the Wikipedia page have gotten their information from. Those links at the bottom of that page can help lead you to other credible sites. Okay, so instead of citing the Wikipedia page itself, you can actually go into those bottom reference pages and click on those, and generally those are fairly credible. Again, it's up to your discretion determining that, but it can lead you to a wealth of other information that may not be found just on that Wikipedia page. So again, use that reference section at the bottom of Wikipedia if you're going to use Wikipedia at all, and you should be good to go. Other methods, again, that aren't online are surveys. We've probably all taken a survey before. We see them in restaurants, we see them online, we see them everywhere these days. And surveys are really useful. It's primary research. Looking at stuff on the internet or in books or whatever is considered secondary research. Secondary research is research that has been done by someone else that you are able to look at and review and cite. Okay? So it's research that you haven't conducted, okay? An experiment, a survey, anything like that you haven't conducted, but you can see the results from, and you can use those results. Primary research, on the other hand, is research that you actually do. So this would be you developing survey questions or doing an interview with someone, okay? And that is research that you have done, original questions that you've done with an original source, so an interviewee or your survey participants, where you get the results and you analyze those results and use them, okay? So that's the difference in primary and secondary. Primary is research that you conduct. Secondary research is research that you did not conduct, but you're able to use the results from, okay? Again, anything you find on the internet is going to be secondary, okay? But surveys can be really useful. Right, you're able to poll your audience, poll some community members or people who are involved with your topic, and use that information to then draw conclusions about that topic, whatever it may be. Or use another survey as statistical proof of your point. If someone else has done a survey related to what you're talking about, you can use those survey results in your speech and then use that as sort of your secondary source, right, if that makes sense. So surveys can be really useful. Again, you're talking to real people, so you want to make sure that those people are relevant to your topic, whoever those survey respondents are. You want to make sure that they understand the topic and are giving good qualified answers to that survey. And one of the more simpler things you can do is just provide a definition to your audience about what you're talking about. So if we were talking about smoking, again, well, are we talking specifically about cigarettes or cigars or pipes or vapes? There's a lot of different methods of consuming nicotine these days from tobacco. So you want to make sure that your audience understands what smoking is before you discuss it, okay? And you just want to make sure that it's clear to your audience what your topic is and give a definition if they don't understand what it is, okay? And along with that, you can provide numbers and statistics. All of those sort of empirical information sources can really help out as well. Again, to avoid plagiarism, which none of us need to do, it's a big no-no. We all know not to do that, or to not cite work that's not ours, right? You always want to give credit to those sources. I tell you guys when you turn in your outlines to me to give me your reference, a little mini works cited that just gives me the link to the article so I can check it and make sure that it's credible. If you are using the source in your speech, you want to give a verbal citation, meaning you would say something like, according to uwa.edu, the University of West Alabama currently has an enrollment of 2,500 students on campus. Okay, you would want to make sure that you cite your source verbally in your speech, because otherwise your audience isn't going to see your manuscript or your outline, right? But they want to hear that you got it from somewhere else. They want to hear that you're using a credible source, okay? So again, make sure that you give that verbal citation because that's very important. So that's the gist of Chapter 5. It's just about sort of credible information sources and how to find information for your speeches. Again, you guys will be doing this in the rest of your speeches, especially in the informative that you do next. So I want to make sure that you guys understand how to find some sources for that. Some of you use them in your pet peeves, and that's great. But again, we want to make sure that what we're using is always credible, always ethical, and morally sound, and also just comes from a credible resource, whether that be a book or online or what have you, okay? So that's Chapter 5, about finding information. Chapter 6 is now about organizing that information. All right, we're going to shift into Chapter 6, which is organizing and outlining your presentation. The importance of organization when you're doing these speeches is that your audience will better understand what you're speaking on if it's organized well, okay? You don't want to be jumping all over the place when you're giving a speech, or your audience will get lost. You might get lost, which again causes confusion for them and for yourself. So you want to be well organized because it helps it flow, it helps your audience understand it, it helps you get through it pretty easily or easier. So you want to make sure your organization is there. And it helps with your credibility overall. Again, if your audience loses interest or you lose them throughout the speech, your credibility kind of goes out the window because they're like, well, why am I sitting here listening to this guy if he can't even, keep his thoughts straight? All right, so you want to make sure that your organization is there, and that's why I give you guys that outline template and that manuscript template so you guys understand some effective organization tools as we go throughout the course and as you develop publications and presentations for your other classes or your work life as you go forward. You can use those for basically any kind of presentation you ever have to give. So again, those are helpful resources for you guys. The first thing you want to do is to identify your main points. And we've gone through this process before in some previous lectures. But again, for your outlines, which you will use for the rest of this course, you want to make sure you identify your main points, so your body points, right, for your body sections. You want to make sure you have about 3 or 4. That's the standard. That's not necessarily what's going to happen in all cases. Sometimes 2 is okay. Sometimes 3 is okay. You generally don't want any more than 4. 5 is kind of a stretch. So just make sure that you have strong points. If you're thinking of a lot of different points, maybe you aren't using strong enough points that can stand on their own. Maybe combine some of those together to make your point a little bit stronger, okay? Eliminate the ones that are a little weaker and just focus on the stronger ones. All right, that's just some methods of honing those in to really 3 or 4 strong points, okay? Another important facet is that your main points need to be sort of equal importance. Okay, and what we mean by that is you want to have enough supporting material for all of them that they all make sense and are all kind of rationally sound together, all right? In organizing your outline, you generally want to put a stronger point first, okay? So for your first body point, if you're using 3, we're going to use that example of using 3 body points. So your first one should be fairly strong, again, to sort of get your audience's attention, right, and establish a little bit of credibility for yourself right away. Your middle one can be sort of the flexible one, maybe the one that's not as strong as the other 2. Because again, it's going to be sandwiched between 2 really strong ones. So your first one should be fairly strong. Your middle one's flexible. Hopefully it's strong as well, but it's flexible in terms of your content there. But your final body paragraph should be your most important. It should sort of be the kicker, right? Because that's what your audience is going to remember more. They'll remember more about the ending than they will the beginning, just because that's the way our minds work. Our attention spans aren't that great. So you'll always remember stuff that's closer to the end than you will the beginning. So you want to make sure that your last body paragraph is sort of your strongest and has sort of your strongest supporting information, and just kind of hones it in and sort of kicks the audience's minds into high gear about thinking about your topic, okay? But again, you want them to be as sort of parallel as possible, and parallel means similar. They sort of mirror each other in terms of body and style and length. Okay, so you want to make sure that that is done effectively. There's several different ways to determine how you order your points. So if something happened before another, do it in sort of time order. So this happened first, this happened second, this happened third. If you were telling a story, you would obviously tell it that way. You can talk about cause and effect. Okay, so this caused this, which then caused this. Again, it's sequences, it's sequential. Okay, so talk about them in that way. Talk about them in terms of importance. Again, so think about breaking them down in the way that we just described, where you have a strong one first, sort of a mediocre one maybe second, and then a really strong one last. So talk about them in terms of importance, or talk about them in terms of problem solution. So we said this is a problem, and here's the solution that we used to fix it. We did it this way, and this way. Okay? So again, there's many different ways you can organize your speech that way, and that's up to you. Determining the order is really just a matter of doing what makes sense to you and what will make sense to your audience, okay? Importance there is kind of key, using that structure of strong, hopefully also strong, but then really strong closer, okay? That's going to give you sort of your best result. So think about that when you're doing this. Supporting materials that you can use for your body paragraphs or for your presentation as a whole. You can use visual aids, which we encourage. Anything that can help your audience understand your overall message can be beneficial to a speech. You want to make sure you use transitions, meaning that you have a clear distinction between your sections, all right? You can use things called signposts, okay, which are just types of transitions. These are what we think of most. My first point about this topic is this. Next, my second point about my topic is this. Finally, my third topic about my topic is this. Okay, first, second, third. It's time order, right? There's signposts that say, okay, here's what we're doing first, here's what we're doing second, and finally we're doing this last. Okay, clear, easy to understand transitions between your body paragraphs that indicate that your speech is moving into different sections. You can do the same thing for your conclusion, where you would say in conclusion. Again, that's a clear indication that you're moving on to a different section. So those can be really helpful. Your audience is really honed on those. They're really sort of hone in on those. They know that that means, hey, we're moving on. So those are really beneficial. So I encourage you to use those. You can also, especially in your introduction, preview your points so they know what to expect as you go on. So I encourage you in your introduction to preview your main points and then establish those main points in your body paragraph. So if you said, in this speech we'll discuss this point, and this point. In your body paragraphs you should say, first we'll be discussing this point. Second we'll be discussing my second point. Third we'll be discussing my third point. And then you close out with your conclusion. Okay? So again, you guys have that sample outline that I posted on Blackboard, that's not the be-all, end-all outline format, okay? And you don't have to include all those section titles and things like that. I don't care about that. I just want you guys to kind of follow that standard format. It's not, again, the best outline ever, and outlines are always flexible depending on your content and the subject matter. But use that as a guide of sort of the format that I want. I'm sure you guys have probably done outlines before. They're a fairly simple concept, but I want you guys to sort of follow that format in this course from now on, because you guys will do that for the rest of your speeches. So keep that in mind. Another important thing, and it's included on that sample outline, is an attention grabber. So again, we've discussed this before. We want to gain our audience's attention as much as possible right away and keep it as we go. So some ways to do that are to invite participation from them. So maybe ask a poll, how many of you have ever, smoked a cigarette, right? They may not want to raise their hand, but again, you're asking them a question. It's engaging to them, okay? You can use audio, video, PowerPoints, anything visual or sort of sensory can kind of get them involved right off the bat. So if you want to play music, if it makes sense to your speech, if you want to show a little bit of a video, you can. Again, using videos takes up time in your speech, so use those wisely. And PowerPoints or presentations can give you a visual for them to sort of pay attention to, as well as the sort of verbal speech itself. Make them feel some suspense, so tell them a suspenseful or interesting fact, right, that makes them a little uneasy. That can, again, gather their attention really quickly. Maybe read a profound quote at the beginning of your speech. So-and-so once said, big profound quote, right? Because, again, people like hearing that stuff, and it makes you say, oh, well, I wonder where this is going. So, again, quotes can be really useful. State really interesting facts. So, 8 out of 10 people who smoke cigarettes long-term throughout their life have, contracted lung cancer. Now, that's probably not a true statistic, so make sure your statistics are true. But, again, that's a really sort of striking fact, right? So interesting facts can make them hold their attention from the get-go. So you can use those to your advantage. But again, tell a personal story. Personal stories are really cool. People like hearing about other people's lives, especially if they're there for a purpose to hear about whatever you're talking about. They want to hear some personal insights to that. So make sure that you include that in there if it's helpful. And one thing you can do is to tell a joke. Now, I have a really dry and dark sense of humor, so my jokes may not go over well with some audiences. So jokes can go really well, or they can go really flat. That's why it's important to know your audience, like we talked about in Chapter 4. You need to know kind of who they are and maybe gauge your humor level based on that audience demographic and who they are. So again, humor can be beneficial, but it can also hurt you, so be careful there. But again, you need to grab that attention right away using any of those methods. Again, that's up to you. So again, use that at your discretion. All right? So again, organizing your speech is really beneficial because, again, it helps you stay on track. It helps your audience stay on track. It helps keep everything flowing really easily, and it helps establish your credibility. So again, the organization is really important, as well as the information that you include. Okay, so from those credible sources like we discussed in Chapter 5. All right, so that's Chapter 5 and 6. Remember, this is a joint video for both of those chapters, so make sure you watch this for both of those. Chapter 4, 5, and 6 will be on your second quiz. Remember to watch the Chapter 4 video if you haven't done that already, and make sure that you look over those chapters in your textbook and look over the notes that I've posted for you guys on Blackboard. That quiz will be posted soon, so good luck and see you later.